It's time to play a little bit of catch up with the Ixalan previews. Thanks to work and trick or treat last night, I missed a lot of stuff yesterday, so let's get into it. We're gonna go over some of the older cards from yesterday, as well as some new stuff that was revealed today. So here we go. This is Dreadmaw's Ire for a red. You get an instant that says until end of turn, target attacking creature gets +2/+2, gains trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, destroy target artifact the player controls. So this is a great combat trick for any creature that's big enough to survive the combat, smash on over through, or even a free hit to their face. You just hit it with this, and you can take out just about anything, and it's instant speed. So you can just do it and be like, oh, there goes your immortal sun, or there goes your what is it, Chamil, the inner sun. You can blow up stuff just at random with this thing. I really like that it's an interesting take on just straight abrade. Instead of giving you just blow up target artifact for 2, it's for 1, and it's a combat trick to bolster your combat as well. Then we have Zoyawa Lava Tongue for a black and a red. You get a 2/2 Goblin Warlock with Death Touch. It says at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sack a permanent. It deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't. So this is more of a commander style card. I mean, it will work in 1v1 very well, probably. But in this case, it's actually probably better as a commander thing because you can hit multiple opponents. Because if they don't want to lose their stuff, or they can't really afford to, or they don't want to discard a card or can't, this thing works well to just start punishing them, especially if you can get stuff like damage triplers, Fire Emancipation, City on Fire, all that kind of stuff. You can bolster that damage. It's like, okay, discard a card, sack a permanent, or take 9 off of this thing. It's pretty nutty what it could do. So I really like this card. I think it's going to do a lot of good things in Commander. 1v1, you can probably punish people even further, though, because if you like nuke the board and then drop this, or play this and have a way to have it survive blowing up the world, basically, with like burn down the house or whatever, then they're forced to discard their hand, or if you've been attacking their hand, they may not have anything. So then they got to start sacking lands or random artifacts they might have laying around, or enchantments or something, just to keep this thing from blasting them. And artifact decks this set are getting nice stuff. This is Fabrication Foundry for 1 and a white. Tap, add a white. Spend only to cast an artifact or activate an ability of an artifact source. 2 and a white. Tap, exile 1 or more other artifacts you control with total mana value X. Return target artifact card with mana value X or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So, like, if your artifacts are being sacked for other effects, or you lose them in combat if it's an artifact creature, or they get blown up, whatever happens to be the case, but you don't have any other way of getting them back, this recycles that one of those artifacts to pull something else out of the graveyard. So I can think of some different ways that this would work out really, really well for us. So, like, you can sacrifice a creature that died and maybe it was like a 6 CMC creature to bring back something that's 5 or 6 down below. So I think that's really cool, and I like this card. I want to try it in some artifact decks. This is Kutzil Malamet Exemplar for 1 green white. You get a 3/3 cat warrior. Your opponents can't spells. Yeah, I can't spells either. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this one goes hand in hand with the Sovereign that we talked about the other day. You increase the power and toughness of the creatures with the counters, with the anthem effects, those kind of things, and then you'll get card draw off this. But the part that I like the best is players can't play things on your turn. If you haven't noticed, I don't like my stuff being counterspelled. This helps with that. Then we have the mono green god that was finally revealed. This is O'Hare Castle, Deepest Growth. For 3 green, you get a 6/5 god with trample. That when it deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. And you can put a creature card and or a land card from among the cards onto the battlefield, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And when it dies, it flips over into a land. Temple of Cultivation taps for a green, or you can transform it back over for 2 green tap, but you have to have 10 permanents and only as a sorcery to do it. So this can have a lot of different possibilities. The biggest thing I can think of is the power and toughness doublers that you get from Zopendrel and Unnatural Growth. You double the power up to this thing to 12. Swing, it hits. You get more cards deep into it, and you can get just about anything you want out of this as kind of like a green tutor effect that's based on damage rather than just dumping a bunch of mana into a spell and go dig up what you want. So this is kind of interesting. So here we have Corpses of the Lost. For 2 and a black, you get an enchantment. Skeletons you control get +1/+0 and have haste. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 black skeleton pirate creature token, and at the end of your end step, you can pay a life if you descended this turn to bring this back to your hand. So this is kind of interesting if you want to mess around with tokens, like if you have like a black-white deck, you can make multiple tokens, and all of them would come in as 3/2s with haste. I mean, this is actually pretty good rate in and of itself. It's a 3/2. Usually you get like a 3/1 for that kind of casting cost. No haste. This case, it'll have haste, and if it dies, it means the descend will trigger, and you can pay the life and bring it back and just keep recasting it over and over again. Or say you sack a treasure token to cast it, or cast something else, you can do that over and over again and just keep replaying this every turn and getting a new 2/2 that's technically a 3/2 with this out, and just keep bringing more and more skeletons into play. Nice, fun design. Then we have Kutzel's Flanker. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/1. Like I said, usually that's usually the casting cost for a 3/1. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, choose one. Put a counter on Kutsu's Flanker for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn. So if a board wipe hits, you play this, it comes in, and it can be huge. Or you can gain 2 life and scry 2, or you can exile a target player's graveyard. Modal creatures like this are really good. Since we're limited in the amount of spaces that we have in a deck, doesn't matter what format you're in, the ability to have multiple modes on a card is a great boon for any deck, because then you don't have to waste card slots on having a card that does one thing and then another card that does something else. So this has a lot of functionality that I really like. The like mono white decks in standard would like this to deal with board wipes. You can do it in commander. There's a lot of things. That first mode is the best mode on the card for recovery type stuff. But exiling a player's graveyard, especially in the set where descend is a thing, and flashback, escape, all that stuff that graveyard shenanigans can do, this is a good card, and it's going to see a lot of play in several formats. Then we have a legendary artifact that I really like. This is Thousand Moons Smithy. For 2 white, you get a legendary artifact that when it enters the battlefield, create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token with this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So it doesn't matter what kind of artifacts you have, you have the creatures to count towards it as well. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you can tap 5 untapped artifacts or creatures or creatures you control. And if you do, transform it. And it becomes Barracks of the Thousand. It taps for a white, and whenever you use the mana off of this thing to cast a spell, an artifact, or a creature spell, it creates a white gnome soldier token with the same ability of power and toughness equal to the number of artifacts and creatures you control. So this thing is really, really good, and Morel Shield of Argive would love this thing, because what it does for us is it pumps out artifact creature tokens that are going to be able to be tapped with this thing. And the gnome soldiers, this thing, are also soldiers, which can also go towards Morel's attack trigger with the soldier stuff going on. There's just several things that this thing has going for it. And you don't even have to use it in Morel. With white, we have access to like Anointed Procession and stuff like that. So you can double up those creatures as you go along and just keep pumping those things out. And you got treasure tokens, food tokens. There's all kinds of tokens that we can tap and turn this thing over in no time whatsoever. So I see this being a really good card, and white artifact stuff is getting really good with this set. Now, this card is not exactly a great card by any stretch of the imagination. It's Hoverstone Pilgrim, 5 colorless for a 2/5 golem with flying and ward 2. Pay 2, put target card in a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. Now, I bring this up only because we just had the Doctor Who decks that came out, and River Song cares about what's on the bottom of your library because that's where you draw from while she's in play. So this card slots in very nicely into that deck, so you can pick and choose stuff that's already been used up or died in combat or whatever, and then use this to tuck it back on the bottom of the deck, so then you can draw it, and it kind of acts as a pseudo scry for you, because then you're able to go, okay, well, this will be the card that goes on the bottom, so I know what I'm drawing, and then you just kind of manipulate that draw as you go along for 2 mana, which doesn't cost a lot of anything. Then we have Akawali, the Seething Tower. For 1, a black and a green, you get a 3/3 fungus with Descend 4 and Descend 8. It has a pair of different Descend modifiers on it. It says for 4, as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2 and has trample. And if you have 8 permanents in there, you get an additional +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than one creature. So at Descend 4, it's a 5/5 with trample. And at Descend 8, it becomes a 7/7 with trample and can't be blocked by more than one creature. This is one of those things where it's decent early. It's a 3/3 for 3. It's better mid game with 4 things in the yard, and it's really good late game with the Descend 8. Now, I got into a little bit of a Twitter spat a few weeks back where I was like, I don't know why they can't bring back Threshold and do stuff like this, where they put different threshold numbers on there. Because threshold was 7 cards no matter what. That was the way the ability was keyworded back when Odyssey was printed, and that was what they did with it. I'm like, why can't they say, okay, the card has threshold 2 and it does like a little bit stronger ability for the early game, and then threshold 10, and then that gives something really freaking good later. They've done that here, except for it's with the Descend mechanic, which is actually harder to trigger, believe it or not. But Descend, in my eyes, is their attempt to try and fix Threshold and make it more of a gaming thing where you're trying to game for the Descend and try to get that many permanents in your yard and build your deck around the fact that you're using Descend cards. But it's a lot harder to hit than the actual Threshold mechanic, which didn't care what kind of cards you used. Instant sorcery, land, whatever, they counted towards Threshold. This only looks at the permanents. So I think this is really good. It could be better with, I mean, that Descend 8 is going to be really hard to hit, but I could see this seeing play in standard as like a finisher type thing for a black green deck that doesn't care. It buries things in the graveyard and just kind of goes to town. Old Stick Fingers would probably see play in that kind of deck. Not sure where in Commander, unless you're going to try to build like a Voltron type of Commander where you stack it up, get it up to that 7/7 ability, and then just start slapping enchantments on it or equipment or something like that to make it hit hard and try to hit somebody with Commander damage and knock them out of a game. And then Dinosaur decks get a new removal spell for a red. You get a Triumphant Chomp. It's a sorcery that deals 2 damage to a creature or equal to the greatest power among dinosaurs you control, whichever is greater. So, you have a 7/7, a 12/12, whatever. For 1 red mana, you get to blast something for those amounts of damage rather than the shock value instead. So I get the feeling this will see play in any kind of red-based dinosaur variant deck, which right now it looks like there's maybe going to be 2 with the green, red, white, or the green, red, blue if you're going to use the new Jurassic Park variant partner pairing with Owen Grady and blue. Now, if you watch my stuff long enough, you know I love clone effects, and this is kind of like a semi-weird clone effect. It's called Deep Fathom Echo. For 2, a green and a blue, you get a 4/4 Merfolk Spirit that says at the beginning of combat, it explores. Then you may have it become a copy of another creature you control until end of turn. So the downside is it can only target your own stuff, but it can become a second copy of any kind of really good card that you have on your side of the board that's not legendary, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the game goes along. So I kind of dig that. I think it's kind of fun to mess around with, and I will be trying it in decks that have green and blue in them. Now this one's getting talked about a lot online right now. This is Tarian Soul Cleaver. For a colorless, you get a legendary artifact equipment that gives the equipped creature vigilance and has, whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a counter on the equipped creature and it equips for 2. Now you will note it does not say anything about your stuff you control. No, 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 no. It's any artifact or creature. So if you put this on an indestructible creature and then wipe the board, all the stuff dying puts counters on the creature. If your opponent's sacking treasures for a bunch of stuff, it puts counters on here. If they're sacking creatures for stuff, it puts counters. You get the idea. This thing is really, really good with stuff that loves things going into the graveyard. And if your opponent is playing that kind of deck, this will punish them as that creature is going to just keep growing as things go along. And then once, you can just start smashing things around. This would be really good with like an Ozolith in the deck. Because then if the creature died, you can go ahead and shift the counters onto the Ozolith and then move the cleaver and move the counters over to the next creature. There's some interesting things going on here. I like this card. I'm not usually a huge fan of equipment, but I do like the design of this card. Then we have a land that I'm going to bring up because I have a Titania deck that's all about lands, and you're sacrificing lands and you're sending lands to the graveyard. This is Echoing Deeps. It's a land cave that says when it enters, it can become a tapped copy of any land in your graveyard, and it gains the cave subtype and it taps for a colorless. But so what you can do is you can come in and Tafrakoros if you need the mana early game. But then later in the game, if you have lands in your graveyard, or maybe your opponents blew up one of your lands for some reason, like you had a Maze of Ith or whatever happens to be, or you have fetch land in your graveyard, you name it, this can come in and become a tapped copy of that land out of your graveyard, and you get basically a secondary copy of it in your deck. So, like I said, I love this with my Titania deck. I'm going to probably get a copy of it specifically for that deck because you're constantly sacking stuff to go ahead and get advantages of those lands, and then you can actually get the lands back somewhat with this card. Then we have what I think is the only non-translated card of the day. It translates as Giant Raptor. For 2 green green, you get a 5/3 dinosaur with Ward 2 that says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add green green to your mana pool. So it's a Laramie's Vineyard attached to a dinosaur, which then in the future, once you've had it sitting there for a turn or two, helps you advance into the bigger dinosaur. So I mean, it's a good cheap dinosaur to get on the board, but that 3 toughness is going to be kind of hard to get around unless you have other ways of pumping your dinosaurs up. I'm not sure where this is going to see play. I mean, Commander it probably will, but like in standard and stuff, I don't see this seeing play because of that 3 toughness. It just dies too easily to things. But I'm happy. I will be happy to be proven wrong about that if somebody comes up with something. Now we're getting into some more recent stuff that was revealed in the last hour or two. This is Tendril of the Myco Tyrant. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/2 fungus wizard that says 5 green green, put 7+1/+1 counters on a non-creature land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 fungus creature with haste, and it's still a land. So for 7 mana, basically it's a 7 mana 7/7 that your land can then turn into an attack with. And you can do this over and over and over again. Now, some decks might be fine with doing this. The problem is lands are already harder to kill because they're lands. There's not a lot of land destruction out there, but there's a lot of creature removal. So I'm kind of reticent to start turning my lands into 7/7s simply to, try to hit your opponent with. Unless you have a way of making your stuff indestructible across the board, I don't see this seeing a ton of play. I mean, neat concept, like the card, but I can't see this seeing a lot of play unless you really build around it to make that work. Then we have some of the new Jurassic Park cards that were revealed while I was away yesterday. We have Grim Gigantosaurus for 5 black green. You get a 10/10 dinosaur with monstrosity 10. You pay 10, a green, and a black to do this. So it gains 10 counters on it if you do the monstrous cost. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each creature with power 4 or greater your opponents control. So if they have a bunch of stuff that's, 4 or greater, that you activate this, it becomes a 20/20. And when it does that, it destroys all artifacts and other creatures than the Grim Gigantosaurus. Holy crap. Yikes, that's a mouthful, but that is a very powerful effect. And if you can pull it off, A, more power to you, and B, you're gonna win more than likely because this thing is gonna make it so you have an attacker that can wipe out anybody in just about any format that's not commander damage. Yikes. I can't wait to try that one out though. That's really good. Then we have Savage Order for 2 green green. It's a sorcery as an additional cost to cast the spell, sack a creature power 4 or greater. You can search your library for a dinosaur creature card, put it into the battlefield, it gains indestructible until your next turn. So we already have Natural Order in the game. It's the same casting cost. You have to sack a green creature to get the ability, and you can only search for a green creature. In this case, you can search for any dinosaur out of your deck. That's the only restriction, but then it's power 4 or greater, but again, not a green creature. So this has some benefits and drawbacks in relation to what was going on with Natural Order, but it's very, very similar and probably going to be a much cheaper alternative to that card if you don't want to shell out the money because it's actually kind of pricey for what it is. Then we have Spitting Dilophosaurus for 2 and a black. You get a 3/2 dinosaur that when it enters the battlefield or attacks, put a -1 negative counter on up to 1 target creature. Creatures your opponents control with -1 -1 counters on them can't block. Okay, I had not read this card yet. Hot damn. Okay. Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. This card, if you have that deck, needs to go into it because that deck is all about spreading -1 -1 counters. And if you put a -1 -1 counter across the board off of, I don't know, Carnifex Demon or Black Sun Zenith or anything like that, none of your opponent's creatures can block, and then you just free swing, and then you can put another counter off of this onto something else, or you just free swing your stuff through and hit somebody really, really hard. I like this card. Then we have Cresting Mosasaurus for 2 blue blue, 4/8 dinosaur with Emerge, 6 and a blue. As you cast a spell, you can sack a creature, then pay the difference in the Emerge cost for the mana value. So, like, if you sacrifice, say, a 6 cost, then this only costs a blue to get out. I mean, holy crap. That's pretty good. And then when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return each non-dinosaur to its owner's hand. So this is kind of like a dinosaur version of Cyclonic Rift. That's pretty freaking good. I like that. That's I'm gonna get a copy of that for the Owen and Blue deck I want to work on. So yeah, that's good. I like it. Then we have Henry Wu, InGen Geneticist for Sultai colors. We get a 1/4 human scientist. It and other humans you control have exploits, so you can sacrifice a creature when it comes into play to get an ability off of it. And whenever a creature you control exploits a non-human creature, draw a card. If the exploited creature was 3 or greater in power, draw or create a treasure token as well. I'm not sure about this one. You're gonna have to play mix and match with this card. You're gonna have like a good balance of human creatures to get the extra triggers off the exploit, but then you're also going to have some stuff that's big enough in order to exploit and get the treasure token if you want to do that. Because I mean, otherwise, I mean, all you're getting is card draw for sacking your creatures for the lower powered stuff. But if you want those treasure tokens, you're going to have something big enough to give up to get those treasures. I think if you go about this, you're going to not care about the power 3 or greater trigger part of it. You're only going to care about the card draw part of it. I could see like a mix and match of the exploit zombie stuff from Innistrad the last time we were there, but because then you can use their exploit triggers and you can get the card off of this, you can get their exploit triggers. There's going to be some interesting stacking there, but I don't know about this card. This one makes me question things. Then moving on, we have Illustrious Wanderglyph. This is from the Commander Precons. Uh, the rest of the cards from here on out are also going to be from there. For 4 and a white, you get a 2/2 Golem with Ascend. So if you have 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing. Other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing. And at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. Okay, so this is what the hell is that card? Verdant Force. My brain had to think about this. Verdant Force lets you get Sapperling tokens every upkeep. This gives you a gnome artifact every upkeep, which are 3/3s if you have the City's Blessing. So this gives you a built-on variation of the +2/+2 to all artifact creatures you control type stuff. This is pretty good. Again, the white artifact stuff in this deck is getting a big bolster, and I could see a mono white artifacts deck coming out of this set that's really, really good in Commander. And then we have the Altar of the Wretched for 2 and a black. You get an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you can sack a non-token creature. If you do, draw X cards and mill X cards, where X is the creature's power. And then it has craft with 1 or more creatures for 2 black, black. And then it has also pay 2 and a black to return the altar from your graveyard to your hand. So if it dies after you flipped it or it gets blown up before you flip it, you can go ahead and get it back and try again. Now, this is one of the first ones I've seen where it says 1 or more creatures. Usually it's a set amount, but that's because on the backside it becomes Wretched Bone Mass. It's a skeleton horror with power and toughness equal to the total power of the exiled cards used to craft it. And it also has flying as long as one of the exiled cards used to craft it has flying. Same is true for first strike, double strike, death touch, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, protection, reach, trample, and vigilance. Holy mouthful. So we've seen stuff like this before where if there's these things in the graveyard, when it enters the battlefield, it gains like these abilities. Well, this is really good because then you're like, okay, I can dump a bunch of stuff into the graveyard. It has keyword abilities, exile like, 2 or 3 of them, and then it gets this big monstrous threat that has to be dealt with. I would say the best things you can probably try to do with this is try to give it hexproof and or indestructible, and so you can't get rid of it unless they have a mass exile effect across the board, like Sunfall or Farewell. But if they don't have those things and you play this on indestructible or hexproof, you're in business to have a threat that's going to stick around and cause all sorts of trouble. Now, this one caught my interest because I love mono red spell slinger type decks and blue red spell slinger decks. So this one is right in my wheelhouse. It's Orrich Stalactite for 1 and a red. You get an artifact that taps for a red, spend the mana only to cast instants and sorcery spells. And then you can craft with 4 or more red instants or sorcery cards, and it's going to flip over into Cosmium Catalyst. For 1 and a red tap, you choose an exile card used to craft the catalyst at random, and you can cast the card without paying its mana cost. So like if you stack a bunch of burn spells underneath this thing, and then you can just start randomly chuck and burn at somebody. And you don't know what you're going to get, but at least it gives you some reuse. Since red is kind of suffering in the draw department for the most part, that's one of the biggest drawbacks to playing a mono red deck is most of its stuff is you have to discard something to draw something, so there's no real pure draw in the color. At least this way, you have a way to reuse some of your spells after you've already burned them off and then be able to fling them again. This is probably one of the best removal spells I've seen printed in a very long time. This is Contest of Claws. For 1 and a green, you get a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another creature. If excess damage was dealt this way, discover X, where X is the excess damage. So, like in a dinosaur deck where you're already paying to play big 7/7, 8/8, 12/12, big monstrous dinosaurs, or a dragon deck where you're doing that kind of stuff, and green's probably part of the color configuration. This is really good because you're be able to smash something and say you just want something, to get a free spell off it. Smash a 1/1 and use all that excess to discover X and just start going through the deck and getting something big and nasty. And if you have Scry, you can just set up whatever's going to be coming. You're just like, okay, I'll get this for free and smash it. I like this card a lot. And this is Xavier Sal, Infested Captain. For Sultai colors, you get a 3/3 human fungus pirate. Tap, remove a counter from another permanent you control to populate, activate as a sorcery. So you get to create a copy of a token that you control. And then you can tap and sack another creature to proliferate, to activate only as a sorcery, to put counters on stuff. So ideally, what you can do is put a bunch of like +1/+1 counters on stuff, and then you're able to remove the counter to populate like a token creature or whatever. And then later on, you can sacrifice the creature, like a creature that you ripped all the counters off of, to proliferate and add counters to those other creatures you've already put the counters on. So there's going to be some interesting counterplay here where you're trying to populate to make a bunch of stuff, but you're also trying to proliferate to make them bigger. So I kind of dig this. This is kind of a fun card. Now, this card is kind of cool. I think it's the first vampire we've seen that's joined the Brazen Coalition Pirates. It's Don Andrus the Renegade. For blue, black, red, you get a vampire pirate of 4/3. Each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, has menace and death touch, and is a pirate in addition to its other types. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. Okay, so I think this is a fun card, but fun is in the eye of the beholder. If your play group or people that you're playing with, if you're not in a familiar play group, do not like you touching their stuff, this might get a little salty for people because you're having to either swipe their stuff with threaten effects or mind control effects, which is what the blue color usually does, is you just permanently take something. Or, you're casting their stuff by swiping it with exiles, with like Gaunty and stuff like that. You kind of have to counterbalance that. Have a discussion with players. If they don't like that kind of thing, don't play this card. Then we have the Indomitable for 2 blue blue 6/6 vehicle with trample that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, cruise for 3, and you can cast it from your graveyard as long as you control 3 or more tapped pirates or vehicles. So I like the effects of coastal piracy and reconnaissance mission and stuff like that in my Locust God deck. This is a third version of that, basically, because you don't have to have it as a creature. You don't have to turn it into a vehicle. You can just let it sit there as a third version of those. Those are enchantments. This is an artifact, but it sits there and does nothing but let your other creatures give you card draw. Now, with the Locust God, what's cool is like as your creatures are hitting those little insect tokens that fly over and hit, you're going to draw a card and create more of them as you go. So that's really why I really like this card. And then this is the Grim Captain's Locker for 3 and a black. You get a legendary artifact, tap, surveil 1, so then you can put stuff in your yard or at least figure out what you got coming up soon. And then until the end of your turn, each creature card in your graveyard gains escape, 3 and a black, tap, exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. So the surveil part actually sets up the rest of the card. So you can tap to surveil, stick a creature in the yard, then you can tap and give it the escape ability and bring it out of your yard later, or to at least fill your yard, use the surveil to fill up your yard so you have the ability to escape. So this is kind of an interesting take on the reanimator strategies that I really like to play. I don't really like exiling my stuff out of the yard so much, but for 3 and a black, that's a cheap way of doing it. That's Zombify on a stick, basically, where you're just like, okay, boom, get it back. I don't care. So yeah, that's a fun reanimation spell, and I think I'm gonna give that one a whirl in some decks too. Now this one is a little more pirate/skeleton specific. This is Skeleton Crew, 3 and a black, 3/3. Each other creature you control that's a skeleton or pirate gets +1/+1. And whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black skeleton creature token. 5 and a black, return this from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this is something that can bring itself back, which is good. It has the ability to, as your stuff gets exiled from the yard, you can make skeletons that are 3/3s, since this has its own built-in anthem effect attached to it. And if you have a way to, one at a time pull stuff out of your graveyard, or reanimate it or whatever you're doing one at a time, you get these triggers over and over and over again. And that's the way you're going to want to build around this if you want to build around this card in a deck. This is Gemcutter Buccaneer for 3 and a red. You get an Orc Pirate Artificer. It's a 1/3 that says when it enters the battlefield or another pirate enters the battlefield under your control, create a tapped treasure token. And treasure tokens you control are equipment in addition to their other types and have equipped creature gets +2/+0 and equips pirates for 1 and equips everything else for 3. So it turns all of our treasures into bone splitters, which is really, really good. Bone Splitter was regarded as one of the best equipments ever printed out of the original equipment run that they did, and they actually thought it was actually kind of overdone. Like they felt they should have charged a little bit more for that equip cost. So any treasure you have laying around, you can just start stacking them up on a creature. So it's just +2/+2/+2. So if you're not needing that treasure to cast something, just start equipping it to something. And then the cool part is, as long as you're after you get them untapped, because these are tapped treasures, but the untapped treasures you have, you can equip them. And then if, say, you need that mana on the fly, you can just tap and sack and it'll blow up and fall off the creature, and you still get your mana off of it to do other things with. So that's kind of really, really good. And then the last card I have for today is Broadside Bombardiers. For 2 and a red, you get a 2/2 Goblin Pirate with Menaced and Haste. And it says, boast, sack another creature or artifact. It deals 2 damage plus the mana value of the sacrifice permanent to any target. I like fling effects. This is a really good fling effect because as you swing with it, it's hard to block because you have to have 2 creatures to block it. It sacrifices something else and then it just flings it at somebody. So at minimum, if you're sacking a token, like a treasure token or something like that, it shocks somebody. But then if you have the bigger stuff on the board for like later in the game, so you swing with your big monster and stuff like that, let the combat damage. Then when you go to the cleanup step, you're still in combat with the boast. You can actually just go ahead and boast and smash that like 12/12 or whatever and throw it at their face. I really like this card, and I love the art on it too. It just looks like a lot of fun. So that's what I got for you guys today. I'm going to get this thing chopped up and posted. We'll see you tomorrow, hopefully, and then we will see what else they have revealed. The commander decks are slowly getting revealed as time goes on here, and the full set should be revealed in the next couple of days. Until then, we'll see you in the next video.